I'm going to show you how I made my 25-inch by 13-inch concealment flag. Still new to woodworking, and I don't even have a dedicated woodworking space, but I spent last summer making a bunch of boxes, and I thought I'd try my hand at a concealment flag this summer. Each flag measures 25 inches by 13 inches and was made using pine that was 3/4 inches thick. The stripes are 1 inch wide and the union is 10 inches by 7 inches. The box for the hidden compartment measures 24 inches by 12 inches and is 3.5 inches deep. The back of the box is secured with 1/2 inch birch plywood. I began by ripping my pine into 3.5 inch widths on the table saw. Next, I rough cut my sides on the chop saw with 2 approximately 12 inch long for the short side and 2 approximately 24 inches long for the long side of the box. I then mitered the edges of the sides to the exact dimensions. From there, I went back to the table saw and using my dado blades, cut a 1/2 inch deep, 1/2 inch wide rabbet to secure the back of the box. I then dry fitted all the parts together to check my cuts. I decided to use splines to strengthen the miter joints. The plywood backing and the splines will make sure that these mitered joints don't fail. The box was then glued up, and once dry, I moved back to the table saw to cut the slots for the splines. I made a jig to cut the spline slots for my concealment flag box. After cutting the spline slots, I then made splines out of some leftover walnut that I had from last year's box making projects. After some light sanding, the box portion of this project was essentially completed. I was very happy with the way they turned out. The entire box was assembled without the use of any screws. The flag was constructed by ripping 1 inch strips of my pine. There's 6 strips that are 25 inches long, and there's 7 strips that are 15 inches long. The union is 10 inches by 7 inches. I then dry fit everything together, did some light sanding to get ready for the staining. I used Minwax water-based stain, the color navy for the union and barn red for the stripes. During the glue up and clamping, I used a jig to keep the stripes even and to keep the flag from buckling. The jig was made using some 3/4 inch thick plywood, large enough to fit the flag that I was making. Using glue and wood screws, I secured 2 wooden strips to adjoining sides of the jig. Because of glue squeeze out, I put wax paper in between the jig and the flag to prevent the flag from sticking to the jig. I always made sure that I had a piece of scrap wood in between the flag and the clamp. This is especially important if you're using a soft wood like pine because the clamps will leave marks. Okay, one more dry fit before I started carving the stars. To carve the stars, I used a Dremel tool. This is the Dremel 3000. I also use this special attachment for my Dremel. It's part 565, which basically turns the Dremel into a miniature router. Carving the stars was one of the more difficult aspects of this project for me. I could definitely use some more practice. I made 2 flags, and on one of the unions when I carved the stars I had a little bit of tear out, but the other one turned out pretty good. After finishing the union, I moved back to the box where I then hand carved out a mortise for my piano hinge. It turned out pretty good too. Before final assembly, I put 3 coats of polyurethane on everything and then got ready to install all the hardware. I used a magnetic lock from rabetted. I also installed one 10-inch gas strut to each box, which keeps the lid open when it hangs on the wall. And this is what the box looks like with all the hardware attached. I secured the union to the rest of the flag using 4 screws and a Kreg jig, but this is where I ran into an additional problem. Even after securing the union with the 4 screws, it still wobbled a little bit, and this is because pine is a very soft wood. The pine that I used was only 3/4 of an inch thick. I don't think I would have had this problem if I used a more dense wood like oak, or if the thickness of my pine was greater than 3/4 of an inch, and also if my stripes were wider. I stabilized the union by securing a small metal brace on the inside of the lid. It works great. And here's my completed flag, my first one. Overall, I'm extremely happy with how this turned out. For my next flag build, I don't think I'm going to construct the union separately. Instead, what I'll do is I'll have 13 full-size stripes that are painted appropriately and then glued together. Then, after all the stripes are glued together, then you engrave. That completes the video of my first flag build. I hope you go out and try it on your own now.